for something like that, and ended up being kind of like, you know, those lime or lemon squeezes that are half a shell. You squeeze them out, it was like that, but you put the metal in there, and so it made these beautiful 2-inch round half of a ball, like a tennis ball, and one piece. And I was able to have the guys cut the square out that was beneath them and pop rivet and solder that right to the roof, so they look like giant rivets going through. So to this day, you can drive by and see those and go, wow, it's kind of a neat look, you know. So just figuring out stuff like that was, you get to get those creative juices flowing, and yeah.
That's awesome. Give us a little history for those who may watch this, and you mentioned the union stuff. When you came into it, how many of these jobs were union, and what is the benefit, obviously, to a place that offers the union jobs?
Yeah. Well, all of the George H. Wilson is signatory to the union, so whatever job we take on is going to be provided union sheet metal workers working on it, union plumbers, and therefore the client should be able to expect a certain amount of performance out of a union trained plumber or sheet metal worker. Same with carpentry and any of that, because of the fact that they serve an apprenticeship. So there's a standard that all of us learn, regardless of which trade it's in, that has hopefully been set as a high standard. This is the way it's done. This is why we do it this way. And this is what a client can expect out of our performance. So in that respect, all the jobs were union manned jobs. And it was sometimes my calling card when I would go out and bid a project and say, well, we're going to do it this way. Well, the other thing, a client might ask me, why are you doing it that way? I said, well, here's what we've learned works better. And I would tell them why. And it's because of the training I received through the union apprenticeship, through other guys that might help me here. Even I leaned on the service technicians that are here who are also union trained. And we could work together on projects where we would have a house and I might be designing air conditioning and heating for a project, and one particular part of the house might get a lot of solar gain. So we would put our heads together and say, you know, if we incorporate this facet into the design, they're going to be able to counteract the solar gain they're getting in the afternoon, and we can maintain the temperature the way we want it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas other guys maybe who didn't have the benefit of an apprenticeship training didn't have that in their tool belt, so to speak, and might just throw something at it, but it won't be designed. And so, yeah, the experience has been helpful to come out with a good product.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned before coming here that it had a great reputation. What was it like when you actually started working here? Did it live up to its reputation? Did it exceed it? Did it meet your
It exceeded it.
standards? Yeah.
I think if I could say one thing that I really appreciated about this shop, about this business, this family, the standard that they had in the community, I realized as I began to bid jobs around town that George H. Wilson had a reputation in this community. And the bar was set rather high. And I realized pretty quickly, well, being an estimator, you're thinking dollars and cents, you're thinking budget, you're thinking profit, you're thinking, hopefully not loss. But as with any construction job, the job starts and you begin to run into problems that nobody could foresee. But the bottom line, every time something threatened what I had budgeted for a project, was always do what's right. Because two things, eventually it'll come back to bite you. And secondly, we have a high profile in this community. We are not going to cut corners to make a profit. If we messed up, we're gonna cover it at our expense. And believe me, I saw over the years, over 20 years of being here, time and time again, that would happen. Not intentionally, it just is the nature of construction. But the Wilsons always encouraged me, do what's right, Vic. No matter if we lose something on it, we lose it. But we live and learn, and we maintain our place in the community. And that's, to me, you couldn't ask for anyone better to work for. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was it like specifically? You have memories of working for Jim and what he was like, and what was I mean, you mentioned the standard, but what specific stuff do you have on Jim that you can remember?
Yeah. Well, a few things. Number one, Jim was here at the office as early as anybody else, even into his 90s. And he set quite a standard as far as work ethic himself. And once in a while, he would call me into his office and he'd say, "How busy are you?" And I'd go, "Well, I'd begin to list my jobs." And he'd go, "Okay, well, if you get a chance, when you get a chance, can you take a look at this one for me? Take a look at the flashing that it needs on this building. Do a takeoff and let me know what you got." Okay, I'd make room for it. And I'd come in and we'd discuss it and thank you very much. Okay, that's great. But one time in particular, I was very, very busy. And Jim came by my desk, "How busy are you?" And I began to list all my jobs. I think I had 17 jobs going at the same time. And he never said much, he just listened. And then he looked at me and he pulled out his paper and he threw it on my desk. He said, "One more won't kill you." And he walked away. So, and the guys who were within earshot began to laugh at me because they knew I had to do it. Right. And I wasn't going to argue with it.
Right.
So, but I think so there was the work ethic and there was Jim's quiet perusal. He'd walk around the shop, and I remember he came back one time when I was fabricating these curved caps to go over an arched doorway. And they were rather long, and I had several of them spread out on the bench. And it was near the afternoon, and he would always stroll back here in the shop, any time from 3 o'clock on. Things were winding down for everybody, and you could tell he'd have his hands in his pocket, and he'd just look around and wouldn't say anything, but would take things in. And he came up to me and he goes, "You might use a pair of vice grips on this end to hold that down while you're pounding it. It won't jump around so much." And then he'd walk away. Dang it. And I'm like, he's right, because he'd seen a lot and done a lot. And and I think my favorite memory of him is he had me look at a project that he was doing. And of course, he knew plumbing like the back of his hand. But he wasn't as familiar with sheet metal work, at least in the flashing and roof things that I had done a lot of. So it was one of those times when he asked me to look at a project, do a takeoff, and tell me what I got. So I came up with a number. He says, "What do you got?" And I showed him. And typically, I was low in comparison to his number because he'd been around construction so much that you bid commercial things different than you bid residential things. And my venue was mostly residential. So I came up with a number, and he goes, "That's good. Here's my number." And he showed me, and I was within $100 of him. And I thought, I felt good that day. That made me feel good. But the last thing I would say is just that I don't know who else you've interviewed, but the plumbing estimator on the residential side that was doing the same thing I was doing, but only in plumbing, the foreman, Mark Goodrich, he did a job walk with Jim one day, and Jim said, "What do you think?" At the end, he goes, "Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to go back to the office and pencil some of this out." And he looked at him and he said, "You should know how many hours you have and how much a budget you have by the time you leave this job walk." And he's like, "Oh my gosh." How do you do that? Nothing but years of experience. Everybody has a different way, but that was Jim.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you you were working in Watsonville prior to being here?
Yes.
So you were in the area, obviously, when
Mm-hmm.
the big earthquake hit.
Oh, yeah.
What are your memories of that? And then since you started here in '95, I'm sure there was still a lot of rebuilding going on from the
Mm-hmm.
damage of the '89 quake. What are your what memories do you have of that time period?
Yeah, well, I remember the exact time of day that it hit. It was real close to 5 o'clock and October 17th, right? And it was really hot October day and there was no wind. And I was just wrapping up on a construction site probably about a mile from the epicenter. I was up Old San Jose Road. And I was just getting my tools in my truck and getting ready to leave, and a guy asked me, can you give me a jump on my battery? Because it's low. And I said, sure, no problem. So I was walking over to get my truck, and all of a sudden I heard the leaves in the trees were shaking like there was a great wind, but there was no wind that day. I'm like, what's going on?
Right.
And then it sounded like a freight train was coming down the tracks. And then it went boom like that, and it knocked me off my feet. And I got up and I told that guy, I said, you're on your own. I said, I got to get home to my family. And I started to run to my truck, and it looked like King Kong had grabbed the racks and was shaking it around.
Yeah.
And the ground opened up in front of me, and I put on my brakes and skid to a stop, and I got up and ran the other direction, and it opened up that way, and I managed to get back to my truck and just got out of there. But yeah, I can remember crawling under houses the next day. Aftershocks were still happening. We had people's, this one place in particular, the water heater was in the under part